When I graduated with my degree in chemistry as an undergrad, I did not want to go into petrochemicals or pharmaceuticals. I felt like that was really boring. So I took a year off, and I actually walked from California to Louisiana, which took 6 months. It was a 2,000-mile journey, and from there, I realized the importance of food because I was had to eat like 4,000 calories per day. And then every time I ate something weird or like either had too much salt or was too sugary. I went from walking 20 to 25 miles per day to all the way down to 5 miles per day. So the importance of food became, very clear to me during that walk, in a very experiential manner. I had no idea that food science was a field. So in that happenstance, I was like, I have to apply. Like I should just do it.
Welcome to the Etheria TechCast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today, we are joined by Dr. Bryan Quoc, a PhD level food scientist, the author of the book 150 Food Science Questions Answered, host of the upcoming documentary, The Flavor Matrix, and founder and principal consultant at Mendocino Food Consulting. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate having this opportunity.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Your career is a classic story, PhD in food science, a background in chemistry, and then a pivot into entrepreneurship with your consulting firm. So, can you share with us how the journey started? Also, tell us what was the catalyst that made you decide to move from the lab into the world of startups and business?
Yeah, so when I graduated with my degree in chemistry as an undergrad, I did not want to go into petrochemicals or pharmaceuticals. I felt like that was really boring. So I took a year off, and I actually walked from California to Louisiana, which took 6 months, and it was a 2,000-mile journey. And from there, I realized the importance of food because I had to eat like 4,000 calories per day. And then every time I ate something weird or like either had too much salt or was too sugary, I went from walking 20 to 25 miles per day to all the way down to 5 miles per day. So the importance of food became, very clear to me during that walk, in a very experiential manner. So when I finished, I had actually deferred to a PhD program in chemistry, and I spent like maybe 3 months there, and I actually ended up dropping out. And so I meandered for a couple years. I thought about becoming a teacher. I got my master's in chemistry at my alma mater. I spent some time doing some work at Caltech, but nothing really fit until I found a journal article about flavor chemistry and about food science. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a field. Like I actually didn't know, like in all my like 23, 24 years, I had no idea that food science was a field. So in that happenstance, I was like, I have to apply. Like I should just do it. So I applied, got in, um, I did the work, realized at the end of the 5 years, I'm not a very good researcher. I'm much better
Wow.
at, yeah, while I was in graduate school, I wanted to make a little bit of extra money. So I ended up doing a little bit of consulting for some local food businesses. And that kind of sparked my intuition and saying like, maybe this is what I'm really good at. So at the end at the fifth year of my PhD, I also got asked to write a book, which is this 150 food science questions answered. So the publisher actually came to me, which was like completely happenstantial. Like I was not planning it in one in any shape, way, or form. I was just writing a lot of blog posts, and they must have read some of my stuff and thought, yeah, maybe he should write our books. Yeah, it was just coincidental. And then after I graduated, I didn't have a job lined up. uh, I didn't, I it was 2020, so it was during COVID, and so I was sitting around for like a couple months, and my wife was just like, you got to do something. And so I went back in my memory of like, oh, I was pretty good at consulting. So maybe I'll keep trying doing that. And so I ended up just pitching a bunch of different, startups and saying like, "Hey, I have my PhD in food science. I wrote this book. I'd love to collaborate, connect, and whatever." And I did that for like maybe like 20 or 30 emails. And eventually one got back to me. And that was the start of the business because like it was like, oh my gosh, I can make money, right? Like I can pay the bills. That was a really happy moment.
Wow, that's that's a pretty interesting journey. So, tell us, for our audience of engineers and developers, can you demystify what a food scientist actually does? Is it like being a software engineer, but for recipes and flavors? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Oh my gosh, I wish there was that much of like logic. No, I would say, at the end of the day, probably a lot of what I do has a lot to do with sourcing and regulatory. Like, where do you even get the ingredients? Like, I do formulation work, right? Like, don't get me wrong, and I do a lot of reverse engineering, but that actually ends up making up like maybe 20 or 30% of the work. The hardest part is like finding where those ingredients are going to come from in bulk. Um, the regulatory of like, what can you put on a label and what can't you put on a label? And three, like who's going to actually manufacture it? Because there's ultimately a lot of these startups, they don't have manufacturing facilities. They contract out their work with co-manufacturing co-packers, and there's not a lot of them. So I've had to. Most of my work has been just building up those relationships. But yeah, I mean, like I'll give you an example. Like I developed a yerba mate drink, and a lot of that was just changing small levels of the formulation, like, trying to add just a little bit of sweetener, a little bit of, the yerba mate ingredient, or, you know, trying to like change the flavor with like orange extract, or, like there's all these little minute aspects. And eventually you get to something that's pretty decent. I'm not a super taster, but I can characterize the flavor profile pretty well, using very technical terms. And I know where they come from, right? Like as far as, well, this is too tart because, there's citric acid or there's tartaric acid. So I have to round it out with like a little bit of sugar, or I have to, neutralize it with a base or something like that. So the chemistry comes in handy, but again, it's like 20% of the work. I wish it was more, but yeah, that's a lot of what I do nowadays.
Well, that's amazing. So, your consulting work with companies is fascinating. Yeah. So, what does the tech stack of a modern food innovator look like? Are we talking about bioreactors, AI for flavor matching, or something else entirely different?
Oh man, I wish it was that advanced. I probably, I every so often I get a project, maybe 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20, where I have to deal with a bioreactor, which I find super fascinating because there's so many different food ingredients that can be produced and developed using like synthetic biology. And then as far as like AI goes, I mean, I've tried to build a lot of different tools. It just never gets that advanced. Like a lot of these clients like really want something simple, like a vegetable chip or like, a new soda. Like it just doesn't get very far. So I'm like, I have all these great tools that are available to me, but it never we never really ever need to use them, which I think is really funny. So, like, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, the food industry is like a low margin industry. So there's not a lot of room for like add-on costs. Like you really have to do things in a certain, cost window. And the more complicated you make it, the more expensive it is to gather all those ingredients. So yeah, I mean, like, I wish I could just, like, shovel everything into an AI, but one, it's not that advanced. It hasn't really fully understood what I taste, right? And then two, like, even if we were able to get access to something like that, it's just too expensive or complicated for a lot of these projects.
Wonderful. So, can you walk us through a challenge like creating a compelling plant-based flavor? So, is it a series of experiments, a lot of trial and error? I mean, I'd like to know what does that process actually look like from the inside?
Yeah, so I use a big toolkit. Like, I understand, well, a lot of the flavors that you produce, especially meat flavors. So I find plant-based meat really fascinating because there's what's called the Maillard reaction, where you kind of take amino acids and sugars and you react them, and a lot of different flavors are produced. Most notably, like that's the flavors that are produced when you throw a steak on a grill, but also like when you bake something or if you produce coffee, you roast it. A lot of those reactions are forming a lot of what we love as far as flavor goes. And so to mimic that, you sort of have to kind of take a what's called a retrosynthetic approach, which is it's like organic chemistry speak for like, okay, you got to like the final product. How do you get there with the precursors that you're given? And in our case, we do have a toolkit of different amino acids, most notably, glutamic acid, cysteine, methionine, a lot of the amino acids that are found prevalently in meat. So, basically I just look through the research literature and think like, okay, what are our ratios? Like, how much do you need of this sugar and these amino acids to produce like the same flavor profile as say, meatball or something like that. And in our case, I was working on plant-based lamb, which is really really fascinating because not only do you have to control for these meaty flavors, but there's the added aspect that lamb has a lot of these fatty acids in it that gives it sort of like that grassy flavor that people have come to love. It's like very herbaceous. And so you have to also control the fatty acids and like that composition. And so it is a lot of trial and error, but it's like working off of, some roadmap. Like we're not just mucking around in the laboratory. There's like a reason for doing things a certain way. And it's to me, that's probably the most advanced type of project that I do.
Fascinating. So, Brian, you've used platforms like Reddit to build your client pipeline. So, for the scientists and engineers listening, how did you learn to market yourself and your expertise? And what was the biggest hurdle in making that shift from scientist to entrepreneur?
So, I mean, I think in when you're studying science or engineering, you're surrounded by really smart people who are also very analytical,
Yeah,
which it can be really difficult because it's actually quite a narrow space. Like most people don't operate that way, and it took me a while to learn this. It helped that I was married, so I my wife, she's a psychotherapist, so she's very like she's very tuned in on emotions. And so I had to learn from her and understand that, most humans, in fact, the vast majority don't operate on pure intellect or analytical power, but they operate by emotion. And so when I engage with a potential client and I'm running my business, I treat them more as an emotional creature than as an analytical creature. Like I provide the analytical power, right? And so, like as a scientist or as an engineer, that's your role, and that's kind of what you're selling is the ability to sort of break things down because most people don't know how to do that. Like, like to a kind of scary level. Like I think I got paid like a couple $100 to do multiplication. Like that's how bad it was at one point. And there's certainly things that are like so simplistic that you kind of take it for granted, but you realize that actually what you're doing, and this is where the click comes, is that you're saving a person time and energy, right? And like for them, like they're not going to go through the whole process of relearning algebra, for example, or calculus. Like they just don't, they never did very well in the first place. So, like, and so you bring in that skill set, and that's really valuable because, most people don't have that, especially if they're coming in from a business perspective or a marketing perspective or even a finance perspective. Like, it's very different from like being deductive, right? And that's a very special ability that you realize is really rare once you start engaging with a lot of people. But the problem is that when you're going through scientific and engineering training, because you're surrounded by so many people that have these abilities, you kind of just assume that that's how people operate, and it's not. It's absolutely not. Again, vast majority don't know how to do that, which is scary. Don't get me wrong. I fear a little bit for the educational system that we've developed here on planet Earth, but yeah, I've also like, you know what? It's a moat. It's a barrier. Just like people aren't going to go to med school, right? Like going through med school is extremely hard. That's why doctors are paid so well. The same is true. Like you can take advantage of the and this is basic marketing and capitalism, which is, you take advantage of the fact that you have a valuable skill and other people don't, and you're trading, time between someone that, really needs that skill set. Otherwise they get destroyed by regulatory, you know, and versus like, if you were to be at a engineering firm or a scientific research firm, it might not be as valuable because they can find a lot of people to do that. So it depends.
And so, let's talk about your book for a while. In your book, 150 Food Science Questions Answered, you translate complex science into accessible knowledge. Why did you feel that was important? And what's the most common food science myths you enjoy debunking?
Yeah, I I didn't actually set out to write this book. Like the publisher came to me, so they already had the idea. I mean, in the back of my head, I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool," because I spent a lot of time on Reddit, and I answered a lot of questions on Reddit, based on food science because I run the food science subreddit. That's my subreddit. Um, but, yeah, I mean, as far as, like, myths go, what interesting one is, letting the meat rest, right? Like, the idea there is that you cook a steak or something, and then you after you've cooked it, you, like, let it sit for a little bit to reabsorb flavor. Turns out there's really no reabsorption. I don't remember who debunked it. There was a research paper where they actually measured the mass, which I thought was hilarious, like, that someone went through the whole trouble of, like, trying to show that this wasn't the case. But, yeah, it's, like, very clear that, a lot of the it's really negligible, and so, like, there's this whole thing that people do that is not necessary, or even, like, bringing a piece of meat to room temperature. I mean, you definitely have to defrost it, but, like, if it's cold, the, like, temperature gradient is not that different when you throw it on the grill, right? Like, it's gonna get to that temperature pretty fast, so you don't have to wait for it to go to room temperature. It's, like, very negligible, the heat transfer. So there's things like that. There's also things like, I think people don't fully understand things like gluten, like what gluten is. Like, I think it's just like this term that marketing uses to scare people. But, like, actually fully understanding, like, what is gluten as a protein and how it behaves and why it's important to baked goods because there's really nothing that can replace it, is a really interesting thing to explain. And then also, like, really random facts, like, why do onions make you cry, right? Like, there's, like, a whole biosynthetic enzymatic pathway that onions use to defend themselves, and it's just so fascinating because I did my dissertation on onions. And garlic. So it's pretty near to my heart.
Great. So, food safety is a huge critical field. So, how is technology changing how we ensure the safety of our food supply from farm, to table?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is the fact that we can do DNA monitoring like really cheaply. This wasn't the case 10 or 20 years ago. Any kind of like transcription or reverse transcription or like DNA analysis was extremely expensive. I think it was like I remember it being like maybe like $5 or $10 per base pair. and now it's like 30 cents. It's like something ridiculous like that. So it definitely allows us, at acute stages to determine exactly where the pathogen came from, which I find so fascinating. And this is more bureaucratic than anything, is that we don't tend to do it more. It doesn't help that here in the United States that the FDA has slashed its budget significantly. So I'm like, yeah, all that technology, but no money to spend to make it happen. But ultimately, like that's one aspect is basically to trace, kind of also seeing how microorganisms are evolving and sort of evading a lot of our current strategies for destroying them. Right, they definitely are adapting to new types of preservatives and new types of inhibitors for microorganisms. So watching that is a fascinating field. The other thing that is really interesting is strategies for killing microorganisms that have definitely evolved from just heat. Like we use a lot of heat treatment, namely pasteurization, to kill off microorganisms. It's a well established, very conventional strategy, but the problem is it damages a lot of the nutrients and the flavors. And so there's, and these aren't technically new technologies. They've actually been around for 100 years, but we've advanced them to a level where they can be used for production, such as like high pressure pasteurization, where you use like megapascals or gigapascals pressure just to kill off microorganisms. The other one is electric field or electrostatics, in which you use electricity to basically kill off microorganisms, as well as what's called pasteurization, which is sort of like some cross between microwave, like a very precision microwave at like a very specific frequency to kill off the microbes. And there's a lot of things like that. And most of those are used by countries like Japan or certain countries in Europe, like Germany or the Netherlands or that sort of thing, where they have sort of the culture for food, which is a little lacking here in the United States, and two, the sort of the economic system to sort of implement something like that, where like you could take a juice and like use high pressure pasteurization and achieve basically a fresh juice. It's just, now it's truly pasteurized and protected from pathogen growth.
So, from your unique vantage point, consulting with startups, what is the most common technical or scientific mistake a new food entrepreneur makes when they are just starting out?
Not reading enough.
Oh,
Wow, like it's like I don't know. I think people just feel maybe intimidated by the research literature, or they don't feel like they have the time to sit down. I feel like it would save them a lot of time in the long run to just like sit down and bust open a textbook about like basic food safety or product design. And to their point, like if you got the money, if you raise the money and you're paying a food scientist, I get it, like that's good leverage. But if you don't have the money, like you better buckle up and do some reading, because why are you paying me $400 an hour to tell you about the basics of microbiology, right? Like, I think it's just such a waste of time. Like, I mean, on people, on everyone's part, and I can't fault people for trying to cut corners and try to speed things along, but I if you're missing a knowledge set that is really important for your business, I I don't think you should miss the foundations. Like I think a lot of people just they focus on the money, they focus on the marketing, they don't really think too hard about the product itself, which is really surprising. I feel like that's the opposite of things like software, for example, or like robotics.
okay. So, your documentary, The Flavor Matrix, explores the philosophy of flavor. That sounds incredibly interdisciplinary. So, how do art, culture, and science all come together in this experience of taste?
Yeah, like with flavor, it's so fascinating because there's so many different aspects you can take from it. Like, obviously, there's the chemistry, right? Like the hard science. This is like the boundaries of matter. Like, this is the reality we live in. But also, like, what's the intersection between the flavor and like our subjective experience, which, from a psychological standpoint, you have so many different aspects to explore, whether it's, your memories of a flavor of like an apple that you first had, or, the first date you had and you ate, I don't know, pizza, and like these like formidable experiences that basically sear into your like neurochemistry. But even beyond that, it's like, the fact that like a whole culture of like wine developed out of, someone accidentally leaving grape juice, in a clay pot, right? Like 5,000 years ago. And like, now we have like, these wine tastings, like to grade all the wines and like so many different varieties. And like this whole industry that's propped up because of our love for wine. Like, and, that has so much to do with the importance of alcohol to our culture. And like, I mean, it's as simple as people liking to party. You can think of our ancestors like, yeah, like it's time to party, right? Like, it's really nice to think that like, it's something like that sort of helps kind of ease the tension of civilization, because it's hard. It's hard to survive as a species in a race. And then there's also, the evolution, of flavor, like the importance of the fact that, as humans, we gravitate towards fire, and after sort of being able to harness it and cook food with it, there's some really, really interesting research that suggests that the flavor compounds that are formed, like I mentioned before, the Maillard reaction, these byproducts are actually toxic. And not only are they toxic, but they're really dangerous for the microorganisms that live in your gut. And so there's this theory that our microbiome has had to sort of evolve alongside our sort of continuous consumption of cooked food. And that may actually have a role in our, human longevity, because these toxins are the same toxins that are formed from aging, same exact ones. And so it's like this really weird like confluence of like somehow cooking and fire is this sort of old technology that shaped a lot of who we are, not only, biologically, but also culturally, and the ability to reserve more energy for thinking and like for doing things, in terms of building civilization rather than just for survival. So there's all sorts of really fun stuff to think about when it comes to flavor.
So, for a STEM student listening who loves food, but doesn't want a traditional career path, so what does the future in food technology and innovation look like, and what roles are emerging?
Yeah, it's a weird industry right now. I can assure you that there's a lot more politics now involved than we ever thought would be, maybe like 10 or 20 years ago. I speak like that because the the big hope is that we'll be able to do a lot more work in cell-based agriculture, growing meat in bioreactors. And I think there's a lot of potential there, and there's also a lot of hope for, someone that's a bit of a foodie, but also has a scientific or engineering background to get involved. The only issue with that is there's a lot of the investment has dried up, and there's a lot of weird new policies, like each like different states in the United States has banned it even though it's not even commercially available, and a lot of that has to do with like the animal industry sort of pushing back, the conventional animal industry. So, it I would say there's potential there. There's also precision fermentation using synthetic biology to grow different components, and food ingredients. Most notably things like collagen that normally come from animals, or even just flavors. Like, vanilla is really expensive, and it only comes from like 5 different regions in the world. 80% of it from Madagascar. So being able to not only produce vanilla flavoring, but to do it with high fidelity with the natural version is a huge technical issue. And I find that aspect of food technology really fascinating as well. And there's also companies that are producing milk protein or producing analogs to milk, using synthetic biology, and doing so basically to avoid milking a cow, right? To sort of preserve the cow's life and quality.
Great. So, Brian, tell us, what does innovation mean to you, and how does it relate to your line of work, bridging deep science with practical business applications?
I think innovation is an interesting confluence of human design and like understanding the human in all of this. Like, you know, science and technology are just tools at the end of the day. And in order to meet the needs of humans, you have to really understand them. And sometimes you can produce something or design something, invent something that has no practical application. And we understand that's kind of moot. But there are sometimes when you assume a practical application and you really hope for it, but then you actually study humans and you watch them use things and you're like, yeah, that didn't really land, right? And so I think innovation is connecting those dots and not just those dots, but also understanding like the cost parameters. Like you can't just make something that costs like even as simple as like a latte. Like you can't charge $15 for a latte. So whatever innovation you developed in that space needs to be within the basic cost parameters. So I think it's asking a lot of a person to do innovation, but it's kind of keeping your eye on all these different factors that come into play when you're designing something for the human need.
Oh, great. So that was an interesting one. So finally, for our listeners who are inspired to learn more, whether about your consulting, your book, or the documentary, so what is the best place for them to go find your work or contact you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just go to my website at mendocinofoodconsulting.com. Or if you just look up my name, Bryan Quoc, I have like a ton of articles that redirect to my website. So, I think any of those will work really well.
All right, Brian. It's been a really interesting conversation with you, and I am excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Ezekiel. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.